She stood in a British courtroom in 1945, staring down 12 judges who held the power to send her to the gallows. Around her sat 44 other Nazi officers and guards, waiting for the same verdict, death. But Herta Ehlert wasn't afraid of dying. She was afraid of something else entirely, because Herta Ehlert knew a secret. She knew exactly how many lives had been destroyed under her watch, and she knew the world was about to find out. This is the true story of a woman who helped run some of history's most brutal death camps, and somehow walked out alive, not executed, not hanged. She lived to be 92 years old, and by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how and why that should disturb you. If you're new here, welcome to Nazi Dark History, the channel where we don't just tell you what happened, we show you how ordinary people became monsters, and what happened when the world tried to make them pay. Hit subscribe, because today's story is one of the most infuriating cases of justice slipping through history's fingers. Let's go back to Berlin, 1939. Herta Ehlert wasn't a soldier. She wasn't a fanatic. She was a bakery saleswoman, an ordinary German woman selling bread to ordinary customers. Nothing about her life suggested what was coming. Then, in November 1939, a letter arrived. The labor exchange had called her up for SS service. She said later she didn't even know what the SS truly was. But within months, she would be standing inside the gates of Ravensbrück, one of the most feared concentration camps built exclusively for women. And here's where the story takes its first disturbing turn. Ehlert would later claim under oath that she was too kind to the prisoners, that she got in trouble for feeding them, that she was punished for showing mercy. But the evidence told a very different story, and that contradiction between what she claimed and what actually happened is exactly what would come back to haunt her years later in that courtroom. At Ravensbrück, she was assigned to watch over prisoners, to make sure no one broke the rules of a camp built to strip human beings of everything: their names, their dignity, their will to survive. And slowly, something in her changed. By 1942, she was transferred to Majdanek near Lublin, Poland, one of the deadliest camps in the entire Nazi system. Officially, she called it a punishment posting, but records from her own trial would later reveal something far more damning. She didn't lose privileges there, she gained them. She received bonuses, better living conditions, a promotion in everything but title. So why would a punishment come with rewards? That single question would become one of the most important threads in her entire war crimes trial. And it's the same question that should make you deeply uncomfortable about everything she said in her own defense. But her journey through the Nazi camp system was only just beginning, because from Majdanek, she was about to be sent somewhere that would place her name in the history books forever. A place where she would work alongside two of the most feared women in the entire Third Reich. By mid-1944, Herta Ehlert had been transferred to Krakow. And once again, the same pattern repeated itself. SS officers noticed something about her that didn't fit the role she was supposed to play. She was too lenient, too polite, too willing to treat prisoners like human beings. But instead of rewarding that humanity, the SS did something chilling. They sent her back to Ravensbrück, not as a punishment this time, but for retraining. And the woman assigned to reshape her into a proper guard was one of the cruelest names in Ravensbrück's history: Dorothea Binz. Binz was infamous for her brutality, a woman whose name alone made prisoners freeze in fear. And it was under her guidance that Ehlert would be molded into something colder, harder, someone capable of what came next. During this period, something personal happened too. Ehlert divorced her husband. The war had already taken so much from so many people, but for her, it seemed to strip away the last pieces of her old civilian life. The bakery saleswoman who once sold bread to strangers in Berlin, that woman was disappearing, and what replaced her would soon oversee some of the darkest chapters of the Holocaust. From Ravensbrück, she was sent to Auschwitz. Yes, Auschwitz, the name that needs no introduction. There, she supervised women prisoners forced into slave labor commandos, work units where exhaustion, starvation, and death were part of daily routine. She later served at a subcamp of Auschwitz in Radzko, Poland. But her final posting, The one that would define her legacy was still ahead of her. Bergen-Belsen. By this point in the war, Ehlert had risen to become deputy wardress, working directly under two names that would become synonymous with cruelty in Holocaust history: Elisabeth Valkenrath and Irma Grese, a woman so notorious for her sadism that survivors would later call her the beautiful beast. Think about that for a moment. Out of everyone in the entire camp system, Herta Ehlert was standing shoulder to shoulder with one of the most feared women in Nazi Germany. This was not a minor role. This was not a woman on the sidelines. This was someone deeply embedded in the machinery of suffering. And then in 1945, everything collapsed. British forces liberated Bergen-Belsen, and what they found inside shocked even hardened soldiers. Thousands of unburied bodies, survivors barely clinging to life. A camp so overwhelmed by death that words could barely describe it. Herta Ehlert was arrested on the spot. She would become defendant number 8 in what history now calls the Belsen Trial, one of the first major Nazi war crimes tribunals ever held, predating even Nuremberg. 45 defendants, months of testimony, survivors forced to relive their trauma in front of the very guards who had tormented them. And Ehlert sat there, denying almost every accusation against her: theft, beatings, murder. She pleaded not guilty to everything, but one survivor's testimony was about to describe her in words so vivid, so chilling, that they would follow her name through history forever. Words that painted a picture completely different from the kind guard she claimed to be. What that survivor said next, and what the tribunal ultimately decided, is where this story takes its most infuriating turn. A Holocaust survivor named Helena Nelken stood before the tribunal and described Herta Ehlert in words that would outlive her defense forever. She called her immensely obese, sly, vicious in character, and an absolute master in using the whip. She described Ehlert overseeing the camp kitchen, but not to feed people, to control them. Nelken testified that Ehlert would spy through a small window as prisoners peeled potatoes, washed dishes, did the endless labor forced upon them. And then, without warning, Ehlert would order the women to strip completely naked, searching their bodies for hidden rings, money, watches, anything of value the SS hadn't already stolen from them. Imagine that moment. Women who had already lost everything, their families, their homes, their names reduced to numbers, stripped bare in front of a guard hunting for one last thing to take from them. This wasn't the story of a kind guard punished for showing mercy. This was the testimony of someone who had lived through Ehlert's cruelty firsthand. And there was more. Nelken revealed that when the camps began to collapse and the SS retreated, Ehlert didn't stay behind to face what she'd done. She joined the death marches, forcing already starving, dying prisoners on brutal treks across freezing terrain, evacuating ahead of the approaching Allied forces. So when the tribunal finally rendered its verdict, the question wasn't whether Ehlert was innocent. The question was simple: how much would she pay for what she'd done? Here's where the story becomes almost unbearable to hear. Herta Ehlert was found guilty at Bergen-Belsen. She was found innocent at Auschwitz. The tribunal couldn't fully connect her actions there to specific war crimes charges. And for everything she was convicted of, she received 15 years in prison. Not death, not even close. Compare that to some of the women standing trial alongside her. Irma Grese, the woman she once served under, was sentenced to death by hanging at just 22 years old. Other guards from Stutthof and Auschwitz trials would face the gallows in the years that followed for similar crimes. But Herta Ehlert, 15 years. And it gets worse. Her sentence was later reduced to 12 years. Then, on May 7, 1953, less than 8 years after the world discovered what happened inside Bergen-Belsen, Herta Ehlert walked free. She didn't disappear in shame. She remarried. She took a new name, Herta Naumann, and quietly rebuilt an ordinary life, the kind of life she'd once had as a bakery saleswoman in Berlin before the SS ever came calling. For over 4 decades, she lived free. No prison walls, no public reckoning, no survivors demanding answers at her door. Just an old woman living out her days under a different name, her past folded away like a secret she never had to fully answer for. On April 4, 1997, Herta Ehlert died. She was 92 years old. Natural causes. A quiet death in a quiet home, decades removed from the horror she once helped enforce. No execution, no gallows, no dramatic final moment captured on camera. Just an old woman who outlived almost everyone who could have made her answer for what she'd done, including many of the people she once guarded, whose lives ended decades before hers did, inside camps she helped run. And that's the part of this story that should stay with you. Not because it's shocking in the way we expect these stories to be, but because it's shocking in a different way. It's a reminder that history's justice is often incomplete, that some of the people responsible for humanity's darkest chapters simply walked away, grew old, died peacefully, while their victims never got that chance. If this story left you with more questions than answers about how justice actually worked after World War II, that's exactly the point. History isn't always satisfying. Sometimes the truth is far more unsettling than fiction could ever be. If you want to understand how figures like Irma Grese or Dorothea Binz met very different fates, let me know in the comments, because their stories are just as important and just as disturbing as the one you just heard.